The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first ICLEI webinar on cities and regions Talanoa, taking place today on Wednesday, 31st February at 10 and 16 o'clock Central European Standard Time. My name is Jisun Hwang, Senior Climate Advocacy and Policy Officer at ICLEI World Secretariat. I'm one of the two panelists of today's and I will also double as the facilitator. On behalf of ICLEI, I would like to extend my heartfelt welcome to all of you. Before we start our webinar, let me give you a brief introduction on the technical aspects of today's webinar. You are automatically put in the muted mode, and I would like to kindly ask that you remain muted till the end of all the presentations. Secondly, you have a chance to ask questions during any time of the presentations by simply typing in your questions in the questions box. Thirdly, this webinar is being recorded in keeping with the principles of openness and transparency. And at the end of this webinar, the recording will be distributed to all the registered participants. Now with that, let me move on to introducing my fellow panelist, Mr. Yunus Arikan. He is the head of Global Policy and Advocacy at ICLEI World Secretariat. He is also the local government and municipal authorities constituency focal point to the UNFCCC. Now with that, let us get started with our webinar. First of all, let me show you the table of contents. Today's webinar will consist of these three building blocks. First of all, I will present the overview, mandates, and the context relevant to the Talanoa dialogue, and I will also give you the latest updates provided by the COP23 presidency on the Talanoa dialogue, in particular the Talanoa dialogue session during the May sessions of the UNFCCC in April-May this year. And then Mr. Yunus Arikan will give you the presentation on the details of the cities and regions Talanoa dialogues. First of all, the overview, mandates, and context of the Talanoa dialogue. First of all, the Talanoa dialogue mandate goes back to the Paris conference in December 2015. During the intense 2 weeks of negotiations, what emerged as the most important outcome of the Paris conference is, of course, the Paris Agreement. And in the decision text that contains the Paris Agreement, which is Decision 1 CP21, the Conference of the Parties, mandated that a facilitative dialogue be held in 2018 in order to assess the collective progress of parties in relation to the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement, as well as to inform the preparation of nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, for the next round. This has given the mandate for prepare for this dialogue all the way from the end of 2015. And the UNFCCC process itself has evolved greatly in terms of enlarging the space for non-party stakeholders to also participate at the international climate negotiation space through its by providing its input in relation to enhancing the ambition of NDCs. The first of such a good outcome of the UNFCCC process can be traced back to the May sessions of last year, during which one of the May sessions was the Enhancing the Stakeholders Engagement workshop, held under the oversight role of the subsidiary body of implementation. ICLEI, as the focal point of the local governments and municipal authorities constituency, was invited as one of the panelists at this workshop as well, delivering the collective voice of cities and regions and advocating for the importance of the engagements of all levels of government in delivering the implementation of NDCs. The outcomes of this fruitful discussion has been captured in the conclusions of the SBI, and one of the landmark outcomes was this recommendation for the presidencies to hold an open dialogue where both parties and non-party stakeholders are seated in one table to discuss ways and approaches to work together with a view to enhancing the ambition of NDCs and to strengthen the cooperative relations. Now, the first historic open dialogue was held during COP23 in November in Bonn, under the leadership of the Fijian COP20 presidency. And one of the most important outcomes of the Bonn conference, COP23, is contained in the text Decision 1 CP23, which is the design of the Talanoa dialogue. So it was decided that the Facilitative Dialogue 2018 will now be known as the Talanoa Dialogue in keeping with the principles of the dialogue style of the Pacific, which encourages principles of openness, inclusiveness, and transparency. It is important under the spirit of Talanoa to encourage that we share stories in an open manner and not to do this by pointing fingers or by putting anyone on the spot. So the Talanoa dialogue is going to be a golden opportunity for both parties and non-party stakeholders to share stories and to find out ways to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement with a view to raising the ambition of NDCs. The Talanoa dialogue, as contained in Decision 1 CP23, has these two different phases. First of all, the prepared phase, which has been launched from January this year, will go all the way to COP24. And the political phase will be then at COP24 in December this year. The preparatory phase will have two submission deadlines, one by the 2nd of April, the other one by the 29th of October. And a dedicated website on the Talanoa dialogue also has been launched by the UNFCCC Secretariat. And there you can make submissions. And I would like to draw your attention to the three key questions of the Talanoa dialogue, as we can see in both of the preparatory and political phases pictures, which is, first of all, where we are, and second, where do we want to go, and thirdly, how do we get there? Each of these three questions are key for us to discuss in order to raise the ambition of NDCs and to strengthen our multi-level governance structures and other cooperative mechanisms in relation to achieving the goals and purposes of the Paris Agreement. So during the course of the year, at whatever Talanoa dialogues that you will organize, these three questions will be asked and addressed. And the outcomes will then be captured in your submissions to the presidency through the online portal. And I would like to draw your particular attention to the first picture on the preparatory phase, where it says local and regional discussions will be fed into the May sessions as well as till the end of the preparatory phase. It reflects the direct policy asks that are contained in the Bonn Fiji commitment that Yunus will go more into details in his presentations. But since the Paris Agreement acknowledges and recognizes the importance of the engagements of all levels of government, it is also reflected in the Talanoa dialogues that not just governments at the national level, but at the local and regional levels, and in cooperation with the national governments, they need to talk about where we are, where do we want to go, and how do we get there. Now, let me give you a quick summary of the latest information that we have from the video message that has been given by Ambassador Khan, who is the chief negotiator of the COP23 presidency, at a webinar organized by WRI on 15th February. You can also find this in this YouTube URL. yourself, but just to give you the summary of the key messages given by Ambassador Khan, she provided details of what the Talanoa dialogue will look like during the May sessions this year. And now this Talanoa session during the May sessions will have 5 different elements. Opening plenary presided over by both presidencies, meaning the Fijian COP23 presidency and the incoming Polish COP24 presidency. Then the group will have a breakout groups of 6 groups per parallel sessions. Parallel session 1 addressing the first question, and the second question and third questions in parallel sessions consisting of 6 different groups. And all these parallel sessions will then prepare summaries which will be presented at the closing plenary. Each of these parallel sessions will be led by 6 Fijian moderators, and each of the 6 groups will have 35 people on the table, 30 from parties and 5 from non-party stakeholders. That means the maximum number of non-party stakeholders that can take part in the Talanoa dialogue session during the May sessions of the UNFCCC can be up to 90, because as Ambassador Khan mentioned, you don't have to be attending all 3 questions. So if you choose which question is most relevant to your constituency or your group, you can choose that group to participate. So that makes room for 90 different organizations from the non-party stakeholders. Now, the representatives of these organizations and party representatives will share 2 stories, one positive and the other one a challenging story. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, the opening plenary will be presided over by both presidencies, followed by the 3 parallel sessions, whose summaries will be presented at the closing plenary. And the entire summary of the whole proceedings, of course, will also be presented online so that anyone can take a look at what took place at the Talanoa dialogue during the May sessions. Now, the presidency has reiterated its willingness to provide guidance at any time, and then we believe further instructions as to the details of the Talanoa dialogue, especially during the will be forthcoming in the coming days. So ICLEI, through its webinars, will try to disseminate as much as possible the latest information that we have on the Talanoa dialogues and any communication from the presidencies through the sources that we have. And here you can see the overview of the year-long monthly webinars that ICLEI has planned. Now with that, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Yunus Arikan, who will give you details about the Cities and the Regions Talanoa Dialogues initiative. Yunus, over to you.
Thank you, Jisun, both for the presentation and the facilitation of the whole webinar as well. So let's now focus a bit on our efforts, which is the Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues. Just to recap, for us, our constituency, we have 4 main reasons to be proactively planning and actively engaging in this Talanoa dialogue process. First of all, as mentioned before, Paris Agreement is different than the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol. It opens a new era. It defines a new way of work. And in the preamble, in the legally defining document, there is already for the first time a vision to engage all levels of government. So it's not just anymore our wishful thinking or our voluntary commitment, but it's our duty. It's clear that the Paris era, there is a role for every stakeholder and especially all levels of government. The second part, as we know, in the Kyoto Protocol era, there was much more emphasis on the global mechanisms and the procedures. But in Paris Agreement, there is a very interesting definition. There is a very important principle in the climate change process, which is common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capacities. This means every nation has a responsibility or every nation has a duty, but some have to do differently because of their historical role or existing development processes. But in the Paris Agreement, there is a very specific wording which says these principles are also defined in the light of their national circumstances. This has a huge implication, which means anything that will change the course of action will only be defined at the national level. The global processes, COPs, are important. There's good for guidance. It's good for stock taking. It is good for seeing the direction, but the real change will happen at home. The real engagement, the real transformation will happen at home, and that is important. Why we have to be, as local and regional governments, to be active in the process. The second point is that at the COP decision, at the COP meeting in Bonn last December, there had been an important decision, which is summarized by Jisun's presentation. And originally, this was considered to be only one-off event in the year, at the end of the year in Katowice. But here now, it is open to a process, and it was already enshrined in the document that Talanoa dialogue will also be fed by local and national discussion. So this gives us the opportunity, legitimacy, and the responsibility. The same goes to the process that we are having the chance to share our views, to provide inputs. And of course, in terms of the best ways of inputs is to get together and consult with our members and have their engagement. Therefore, written submissions is also a mechanism, and we can make it much stronger if we get together at home and the various opportunities. The third, on the way to COP and during the COP in Bonn, as a continuity of decades of local government advocacy, we again have convened a climate summit of local and regional leaders, which was more stronger than ever. We had more than 300 participants, and all levels of governance were represented with a strong activities. And it was concluded with a Bonn Fiji commitment. And in this, we have asked that this facilitative dialogue, but by the time we agree on this Bonn Fiji commitment, it was middle of the COP, and it was not clear whether Talanoa dialogue would be agreed. So we were proposing to the nations that they should open up this process, they should engage with us, they should hear us, listen us. And in that sense, when the nation decided to have such a vision, of course, we should be proud, we should be happy, and we should deliver what we have asked for, because we were the ones who was asking them to open channels, and these channels are now available, and now it's our responsibility to deliver, engage in this process. And finally, we did not stop our job or finish our job at COP. We continued, and there was an important announcement in the One Planet Summit held by President Macron of France. And there was an important announcement by the Global Covenant of Mayors. It was a call for action on NDC vertical integration, which is very strongly linked to what we are trying to achieve. Therefore, there's another reason why we should build upon this existing efforts. So, again, yes, these are the reasons why we should be organizing these Talanoa dialogues. But what do we want to get out of it? What do we want to achieve with these Talanoa dialogues is, again, we can summarize them in three basic, let's say, goals. First of all, there is already a Paris Agreement and there is already a process, but this has to be translated to our realities. Of course, every stakeholder, be it farmers, be it business, be it environmental groups, they will have their own positions, and we should define this Talanoa dialogue in our way of work, in our daily lives, with particular goals of local and regional governments, and we should prioritize our contributions. Therefore, it is essential to have such a process. Second, discussed heart of this whole discussion on Paris Agreement, and also the whole 2030 agenda, the new urban agenda. There's so many cross-cutting areas that we could deliver this cross-fertilization, holistic approach, synergies, and also integrated and multi-level governance through this Talanoa dialogue processes. And the most important thing, let's remember the nationally determined contributions, which is currently the official responsibilities of national governments under the Paris Agreement, were prepared in a period that was before Paris Agreement was adopted. So all these new areas of work, all these new visions of all levels of government, or this kind of bottom-up approach was not adopted when NDCs were prepared. And of course, it was a short time frame, and everybody was rushing. So, and probably many of the partners or the member states were also not aware that what they have submitted would start to be an implementation immediately. So everybody was a bit surprised, and it's nobody's fault, and it is just this. Therefore, Talanoa Dialogues is the first time opportunity to bring Paris Agreement home, to bring Paris Agreement, to bridge it to the realities, to see whether how much it is reflecting realities. Maybe there may be elements that has been missed, maybe that was not reflected. Why not now to start to review and altogether present our views and also share our responsibility, so that those commitments can be much stronger delivered, or we can be confident that they're delivered in as appropriate. How do we want to organize this? It's an open process, as in the spirit of Talanoa Dialogues, that we would invite all the members of the constituents of actively involved. A slight moderation, and ICLEI stepped up the focal point of local governments and municipal authorities constituency, as well as on behalf of, which is our global mechanisms. We have special partners, UN Habitat and the Global Covenant of Mayors. Especially, I would like to draw the attention that the new executive director of UN Habitat, Maimuna Sherif, is a former mayor, and she was very actively involved in the climate process as well. And in fact, she was representing the local governments at the pre-COP in Fiji in 2017 October. So now having such a person in the driving seat of the UN Agency for Urbanization is a strong opportunity for us to have stronger support from this community. We would implement these agendas with our partners, especially supporters, UN Climate Secretariat, Climate Change Secretariat, and Fijian COP23 presidency. Since the beginning, they were always supportive of our work, and they have already expressed their strong endorsement through their support to our launch and the roof. We will go through that again. So we would be happy to brief them. We would be happy to convey their messages and then align our events so that they are following us appropriately, and we can provide dual way of support to each other. As we said, the real dialogues will be hosted by different members, different partners, or even initiatives of the LGMA constituency. And we can even expect some of our ambitious cities or regions can step up, and they can also organize their own events. And we already have seen such examples, so that it is it's an open process that every interested and capacitated representative can contribute. We particularly launched the Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues at the World Urban Forum last week in Kuala Lumpur, with a specific vision to announce this process to the urban community. The reality is that, yes, there are so many networks. ICLEI has been involved in this process, in the UNFCCC process, climate negotiations, but there are thousands of cities, so many partners, so many networks who have not been involved in the climate process. And we thought it is the right time for us to open the information, share this information, and have their engagement. And it's not just the mayors or local and regional governments, but it's also at the same time, many of the countries, we are aware, the ministers of urbanization are also not even aware of their national climate plans of their national governments, because it was mainly a process driven by another level, another sphere of the government. Therefore, it is also an opportunity for us to bring the ministers of urbanization into these discussions, so that when we have the discussions at the Talanoa Dialogue, we can have a better informed discussions and provide inputs into the dialogues. Again, this process of a Talanoa Dialogue is really a process that should be customized according to the city and region and the national context that the event is taking place. So there's no here is a basic from ICLEI that can be ended. First of all, we recommend that this event is mainly organized by the local or regional government and or its network or its partner. And there are some cases where national government could take the lead to organize such a dialogue, and they can bring local and regional governments into the process as well. So we should also be flexible such cases in where appropriate. Secondly, we would like to make a differentiation that it is not a typical meeting of local governments on their own. Therefore, it should start with an informative presentation by the NDC, the national government of the respective national climate action plan or national determined contribution of the respective government through its respective ministry. And of course, the other ministers, in particular in our case, ministers of urbanization, it would be extremely helpful if they can be in the room, they can present and they can share, or they can also participate in the discussions. And thirdly, we should be, as the we should share our information, what climate commitments, actions, or targets or initiatives we have as local and regional governments, so that this could be considered as an input to the process, both the delivery and the raising of the existing capacities, commitments. As we said before, at the end of the game, at the end of the day, the local and regional governments are also led by political leaders. Therefore, we could be aware that there can be a political discussion. But as mentioned by the presidency, we want these meetings to be constructive, forward-looking, and therefore we would like this to be much more a joint effort at the national level, that all stakeholders play their role. Therefore, we want all partners to be as constructive as possible. The formats of these meetings can be different or can be defined based on the existing availability of technical resources, availability of the logistics, and of course, because it will not be just a local government event and it will be a consensus or a joint effort with the national governments, there should be a consensus in the agenda. So it could be 2 hours of a big event or a side event of another conference, or it could be full dedicated 2 days event. So we would leave this to the partners, to the hosts. Some of those events can be open, some of them could be closed, depending on the sensitivities or the requirements of us at the relevant places. It would be open as much as possible in terms of a variety of options, and should be conveyed as an input to the process, as mentioned by the 2nd of April, and with but the feedback we received from the presidency and the UNFCCC secretariat is that the better there is a synthesis input, or the better that there is a coalition of submissions, the more weight it would can get in terms of when it goes through the assessment process, and it's also easier to review and consolidate all these inputs. So instead of each event presenting or sending their own submission to the Talanoa Dialogue platform, we rather recommend certain group or certain consolidation as LGMA or members of LGMA to be conveyed. And even more importantly, we really look forward that some of the national governments, in addition to us as local and regional governments, but the national governments also feed their information to this Talanoa Dialogue platform by referencing, acknowledging this kind of meetings, acknowledging the work and the dialogue they had with their local and regional governments, and their commitment to work further. This would be extremely important and helpful for the next step of the UNFCCC process, because we all know that at the end of the day, the decisions at the UNFCCC are party-driven, so it's the member states or the national governments are the ones who would be deciding on the final synthesis of the conclusions or the decisions. Maybe we can go a bit deeper into the specifics of the cities and regions Talanoa dialogues, in particular, how we translate these 3 guidance questions from the presidency. Because we want it to be much more specific and we want it to be much more concrete, so that we can get really the desired outcomes. In the case of the question of where are we, let's fact current NDCs, the current national submitted to the UNFCCC. The key question we can ask ourselves is that, is sustainable urbanization included in the, we know energy, agriculture, transport, these kind of global or major sectors can be addressed, but how they relate to the, are they really connected to this existing urban development priorities and plans? So in that sense, the specific questions we can ask is that whether there's a specific reference to the national urban policy or urban dimensions of specific sectors, how much they're integrated. And of course, we are not at point zero. We have the existing NDCs. UN Habitat made available analysis on the urban dimensions of the NDCs. So these can be presented as information sources, as those, and during the meetings, we recommend that there will be preparatory feedbacks from these documents as an input so that we don't have to go through all the documents again. And the questions, if yes, there are some references, then we can go dig into deeper. Is this respective local and regional government, are they able to be part of these plans? Have they been involved in terms of these investments? Are they covering their also plans, or is there anything they can share so that it can be complementing to what has been addressed? Or if not, again, can we consider any new or existing initiatives that has not been addressed before but can be considered in the current or on the new ones? That could be the type of questions in the responding to the where we are question. In terms of where do we want to go, it's obvious that each national determined contribution is 5 to 10 page long document. They have a specific mitigation target. The question is that target NDCs, is there any room for considering that this target could be higher in the next?
Yunus, Yunus, just to let you know, sometimes you drop off for a second. Maybe a slight adjustment of the microphone may be required, maybe necessary.
Okay, thanks for the reminder. I'll do my best. So exactly this question about, is that current mitigation goal, is it enough? Is it really reflecting our potential? Can we consider a better formulation? Can we make a new revision of this document? Or can we think of aiming higher, going deeper in terms of ambitions in the next round of NDCs? And in that sense, the key question we would like to ask is that so many of local governments have already adopted so many targets. Are they already taken into account when the national targets are communicated to the UNFCCC? Existing targets of local and regional governments, are they complementary, supplementary, or are they additional to these existing national targets? These type of check, and we can, the database we have captured in Carbon Climate Registry, hundreds and thousands of also committed to Global Compact of Mayors and other initiatives. So we can also make a cross-check with these existing information, and we can inform our national governments that this is the situation where we are, and we can ask them to take this into account. And of course, when we ask the question of how do we get there, is in fact, okay, this meeting is done, but what will we do now, from now until the end of the year, the end of 2020, beyond, and each of these have different course of let's say mechanisms, and of course each of these require different mechanisms in terms of technical, financial, and policy needs, and it is time to start to plan and discuss this. Maybe after this event, it's not possible to solve all our problems in one event, of course, but it would be good to start to have a short, medium, and long-term roadmap so that this process is not left it on at this meeting. Of course, this is a recommendation, and we cannot judge any of these events. Here, in this slide, you can see a number of links that contains some of those information, and for each Talanoa dialogues, and we will go through the list of events, before meeting is taking place, we from our side as ICLEI will do our best in terms of our capacities and resources to provide customized information for this country or for the cities and regions of this country so that participants are well briefed beforehand. And in this slide, here is, we're coming to the end of our presentation. We have been working with our members and partners of local governments and municipal authorities constituency and the task force so many weeks. And now in this first slide, you can have a brief analysis of a list according to timeline, which is starting from February onwards, in which city or which country, which type of event is convened or planned, or who will host these events. I can immediately say that we have already been advancing a lot. On Thursday, tomorrow, in the Committee of the Regions in Brussels, we'll kick off an important event, and this will be a discussion. We have already started our plans with our partners in March with the ambitious city projects in Indonesia, Philippines, and in Vietnam. Probably now I see Ms. Veronica Arias joining us from Quito. They're already planning. So there are so many partners who have already advanced a lot, and we are expecting further clarifications to be available soon. And you can see that now we are thinking about around 40 countries around the world, and some of them are already listed here. And in the second slide, you can already see there is a number of pipeline projects or meetings or countries that our partners are still in touch with their, let's say, respective partners in the national governments and the local hosts, so that we're expecting these dates to be clarified soon, so that the countries in this list are also clarified in which events are taking in which country and when. Obviously, 2nd of April, 29th of October are the key deadlines, but until Katowice, which is December 2018, we are still hoping that there is room for organizing such events, because the real input will also be discussed at the COP24 in Katowice at the end of the year. This is concluding slides. Actually, when we launched at the World Urban Forum, we asked the endorsement or support of a number of leaders. So happy to see such a great support from the COP presidency, UN Climate Secretariat, EU Vice President, UN Habitat Executive Director, ICLEI Secretary General, and Mayor member of ICLEI Global Executive Committee and member of the Board of Global Covenant of Mayors. And of course, whenever there's another event, we recommend the partners and the hosts to have their political leaders to show their strong commitment and support to this process. And as we have stated before, multi-level action and our contribution to deliver the global goals is the key messages that we will discuss throughout these dialogues. With this, I'd like to give the floor back to Jisun so that we can have a dialogue with contributions or questions and remarks from the participants of this webinar.
Thank you, Yunus, for your detailed presentation on the Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of all the presentations, and the floor is now open for you to share with us your questions or comments. You can simply raise your hand, or you can put in your questions in the question box. So far, I don't see any questions or hands raised yet, but I would like to take to the floor to Arikan. As Yunus mentioned, Quito is one of the cities that are participating in the Cities and Regions Dialogues, and can share with us more details and latest updates on from Quito side. Mute yourself.
Christina is on the line, and maybe we can unmute Christina.
Christina? Okay.
Yeah. Maria Cristina Argudo.
Christina, can you unmute you and made you a presenter?
Christina?
We hear you. Christina? It appears you're muted at the moment. Can you unmute? Okay, Veronica, I see your hand raised. I'm trying to. You're unmuted. Can you hear us?
Yes, right now I can hear you. I don't know if you have already finished, because I heard Yunus that he was mentioning me. Since I had a little bit of problems, of technical problems, I don't know if I'm on the floor or should I wait?
No. We just opened the floors for an open discussion. So I would like to give you the floor first to share with us updates from the Keto side.
All right, thank you very much. Hi everyone. Yes, I would like to share with you that Quito, specifically Mayor Rodas, has participated in the 3 of the major events related to climate change and the new urban agenda. These were COP23 in Bonn, the One Planet Summit in Paris, and the World Urban Forum in Kuala Lumpur recently. On these events, Quito emphasized the city buildings, energy, transport, and waste infrastructures that have a tremendous potential to become more efficient and build not just a more CO2 viable future, but increase quality of life for all citizens. Also, we have been very keen in related to local and regional governments that have secured clear leadership role at these events. And it was evident during these events that for real transformation, local and subnational governments are key actors in the transformation to a low carbon and high resilience society. And they are already transforming global goals into. So we're very keen to establish the need to develop appropriate synergies across all development agendas, active and enhance engagement of all levels of government. That's why we are talking about the Talanoa dialogues that is important for local governments. So we saw that the mayors are now in the spotlight with this strong voice, and they are gaining influence over time. As the General Secretary upon a time mentioned that the battle against climate change cannot be won without cities. So their role and the contributions must be more prominent and integrated into the national and global decision makings. So the main takeaways of these events is that all levels of governments and all climate stakeholders should join efforts and climate plans, as well as finance should be vertically integrated. So Quito and specifically Mayor Rodas is following up on these discussions and has a plan to host an event on late April, where the mayor, together with the Ministry of Environment and Finance, will launch locally the call for vertical integration and disease and open lines of support to cities in gaining access to finance, especially for sustainable and resilient infrastructure projects. It should be external finance, better access to national and international capital markets, etc. So this is what we call a call to action. And yes, the UN Urban Agenda was endorsed in October 2016 in Quito during Habitat 3, highlighted the need for vertical integration action and adequate resources to support effective implementation and positive impact on climate change, adaptation, and mitigation level. So finally, the vertical integrated NDCs investment plan, starting with cities in Latin America, we would like to see more active, promote and close integration for cities and regions into climate strategies and commitments, and support cities and gaining access to finance, in particular for sustainable and resilient infrastructure projects. Hopefully, we will gain more support from governments, and through these Talanoa dialogues, we think we can achieve a lot of inputs and a lot of effectiveness of having this vertical integration in these investment plans.
Monica, for your with us your updates on the call to action, vertical integration implement is indeed one of the is going to be one of the key enablers for all of us at all levels of government to have a strong and more ambitious NDCs for the next round. So far, I don't see any other questions or hands raised. I see one question from Kobe about sharing this presentation, and of course, at the end of this webinar, the recording as well as the presentation will be shared with all the registered participants. Yunus, is there anything that you would like to add to what Veronica shared?
No, first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for Veronica and is of Quito Metropolitan Government, and together she and the Mayor Rodas has been championing these ambitious actions, and we're very happy to hear their updates. And as you have listened, they're prepared that they would present a very good case study of how a multi-level and inclusive Talanoa dialogue can be organized. In the morning, we had another webinar, and in that sense, there was other participants from other regions, like Tokyo was presenting their plans. So this shows the diversity and the dynamism of local governments who are taking up this process. And we are excited to hear and support the outcomes and convey it to the UNFCCC in all possible ways, and especially in the case of Quito, to bridge the ministers of finance, a big challenge, and that Quito has taken up this ambitious challenge forward. There's already a strong support for the Development Bank and their investment banks, development banks. With the Global Covenant, I think the event in Quito will also be a good practice for the rest of the other regional initiatives. So as you could have listened in the beginning of this webinars, we will organize monthly, and we would be happy to share these kind of progress, achievements, updates from the meetings that are convened. We will also share a certain guidance package in terms of how these Talanoa dialogues can be organized, so that the hosts can also be making use of these guidance documents. And we look forward to positive outcomes and experiences from Quito, and we were happy to convey these experiences and messages to a broader community.
Thank you, Yunus. There's still no other added to the, and I see no other hands raised. And I propose that we maybe, I see a hand raised by Kobe. Kobe, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I think just a quick question of clarification, Jisun. There is a deadline time-wise around April, and I would just like to understand what needs to happen before April to qualify your event as a Talanoa dialogue. It is not as if the event has to happen by the end of April, right?
Well, the submissions are provided presidency. The first one is by the 2nd of April, which is quite early in the April time, and the last submission deadline is the 29th of October. And what's most important in Talanoa dialogue is to structure your dialogue or structure your session in addressing the 3 key questions given by the presidency. Where are we? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? So the Talanoa dialogue has the purpose of addressing these 3 questions with a view to having a stronger and more ambitious NDCs when they are submitted for the 2nd round by 2020. So as long as your event, your session is organized around these 3 different elements and trying to address them one by one with a view to raising the ambition of NDCs, and obviously based on this process, many meaningful insights will then be shared from this session, and that can be then captured as input to the Talanoa dialogue process that can be submitted through the online website that is launched by the Secretariat. And just to recall what mentioned, the has already been launched, and the opportunity to provide input as a submission format is already available. So theoretically, if you already have an input to the Talanoa dialogue process, you can submit your input as of today. So as long as you have a meaningful input that can be the May dialogues. These submissions need to be made prior to and by the deadline of the April, and will then be synthesized and discussed at the May sessions. And then any other inputs that will come after these 2nd of April submission deadline will then be gathered by the 29th of October deadline.
Jisun, maybe I can add a couple of points to your explanations to the questions raised by Kobe. I think in addition to this, to design the event around these 3 questions, the second most important qualifying criteria is that this is a multi-level meeting, so that from the national governments and respective ministries and local and regional governments are gathered around the same tables, so that it is not one constituency speaks and the others listens, but it's a dialogue among different levels of government. I think as long as you can prove this, there will be a certain acknowledgement that this is exactly what is the presidency. On the deadlines, of course, these deadlines are important, but it's important because then the Secretariat will make some certain summaries or some let's say synthesis. But when the technical meetings start in Bonn in the beginning of May and in Katowice in the beginning of December, until these moments you can convene and then you can present, but it may not be so easy to be part of this summary report, but there is still, it will be online, it will be available. So for example, we are discussing that they may come in the end of April. The deadline of 2nd of April will be missed, but what we are planning, ICLEI, we will already a draft input which will summarize, for example, the list of events that such meetings will take place and such discussions will take place. And if there is a meeting of end of April, the outcomes can be sent online, but it's also can be shared during the meeting itself that Jisun has described. We don't know exact the date of this Talanoa dialogue meeting during the UNFCCC conference in Bonn in the beginning of May, but on the day we can still say that, oh, this is also the outcome coming from Quito or who else has taken place after the 2nd of April deadline. So there's always a benefit to catch the deadlines, but it's not the end of the world if you miss it.
Thank you, Yunus. And I see another hand raised by Felix. Felix, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jisun. My question relates to the events that convene the dialogue. So, are these limited to events organized by cities and organizations that have mandates to work with local governments alone? If not, if it goes beyond this scope, what are we doing, or what is the approach to link other events or dialogues outside this sphere? Because I know, for example, the European Commission is also putting measures in place to coordinate activities. So how are these linked?
If I quickly react to that, the invitation to convene national, regional to feed into the Talanoa dialogue, both parties and holders, essentially opening the door of participation to everyone. And as long as we've been mentioning, the 3 key questions are addressed, and the multi-level elements are also incorporated into it, so as to address this importance of multi-level governance or horizontal vertical integration elements that can be used to enhance the ambition of the NDCs, as well as to promote the cooperative mechanisms that parties and non-party stakeholders can jointly work together towards. I believe this that can be then be considered Talanoa dialogue. Yunus?
I think basically yes. One clear situation at the moment, what we have is that we are not aware whether there is any national government who is planning to host a Talanoa dialogue at the national level. If this happens, of course, this is the Talanoa dialogue of this national government. And ours is the one that is convened by the cities and regions and hopefully shared by the respective national government. And we also, as Jisun mentioned, this is an open, for example, last week we were attending a webinar of WRI. There was partners from Climate Action Network or business community. They were saying that they are preparing their events and in their local and regional government's perspective. The key criteria is that this, in the presentations you have seen logo on the top, cities and regions Talanoa dialogues. We are working with our communications team that each event that is under this category, they have this logo so that we are aware that this is our process, and at least that we are able to capture or guide the meeting itself. But if our members, local and regional governments, or their partners, or us, we events that they can claim that this is an input to the Talanoa dialogues. We cannot claim that this is the one that we organize, but we are ones that our constituency has taken the leadership or has been the core partner.
Thank you, Yunus, for your added complementary answers. Now we have reached the and I also questions or hands raised. So I would like to conclude our first webinar on Talanoa dialogue, and I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. this webinar. And as a reminder, this webinar has been recorded, and as was mentioned, this recorded webinar as well as the presentation will be then shared with all the registered participants. With that, I would like to thank you all once again for joining us today. Until we see you next time for the second webinar, we will to prepare our latest information on the Talanoa dialogue, and we look forward to time. Thank you all.
Thank you.